Welcome to this section where we will be talking about the state of digital accessibility across the globe. We will be talking with different accessibility professionals that are leaders in this field from different parts of the world that will be talking about how is the state of the accessibility in the regions, what about the laws, the policies, and how does the future looks like. Of course, it wasn't easy to schedule and align all the agendas, so we will have some questions recorded separately, but we are really happy that we get to have these amazing professionals in this panel discussing this matter that is all the time getting more urgent for all the regions. So I will be presenting the panel of professionals. And before I do, I just want to say that it is an honor for me to be part of this group and discussion, and that I want to thank you, all the organizers in the event, for bringing us together. So we will have Kentaro Ide. Kentaro is from Japan. He will be representing the Asian region. He's a global UX usability accessibility expert, and he's the CEO of UX Express and former Sony UX team lead. We will be talking with Kris Rivenburgh too. He is from the United States and will be representing North America. Kris is an attorney. He's the founder of accessible.org, and he's the author of the ADA book. We will be talking with Judy Okite. She's from Kenya. She will be representing Africa. And she is the founder at Association for Accessibility and Equality. We will be having Zoë. Zoë is from New Zealand. She will be representing, in this case, Oceanía. And she is a certified professional in web accessibility and an accessibility consultant for Intopia. And finally, we will have Susanna Laurin. She's the Chief Research and Innovation Officer of the G3 ICT and the IAAP representative to the European Union. She will be representing the European Union in this case. Well, I am Susana Pallero. I am an accessibility consultant and accessible solution specialist. I am part of the W3C and an invited expert for the IAAP, and I will be representing the LATAM region and, of course, in name of our community, DALAT. Could you please present yourself?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I am Kentaro from Japan, and I run UX and Accessibility Research Agency. I'm happy to share with you the current state of the accessibility in the Asian region. Please note that there might be some overlap with those presentations because the research data is often consolidated as Asia and the Pacific region in many studies.
Hi, my name's Zoë Haughton. I'm an accessibility consultant with Intopia, and I'm here to talk about the state of accessibility within Oceania.
Thank you, Zoë. Susanna?
So hello, everyone. I'm Susanna Laurin. I'm based in Sweden, Europe, and I am working for a company called Funka, and for IAAP, I'm also the representative to the EU.
Thank you, Susanna. Judy?
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Judy Okite, founder, Association for Accessibility and Equality, where we advocate for accessibility for persons with disability, both online and offline. Currently, I'm in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. And I am Susana Pallero. I am from Argentina, and I'm representing LATAM in this panel. I am an accessibility solution specialist. I've been working for 10 years already in the field, I am an invited expert of the IAAP, and I am an active member of the Silver Task Force at the W3C in the subgroup conformance. So let's start with the first question. What is the current state of accessibility in your region?
First of all, the number of people with disabilities in Asian countries is relatively smaller compared to other regions. For example, the WHO says that over 15% of the world's population is estimated to have some kind of disability, though. In contrast, in Japan's case, there are currently over 954,000 people who have some kind of disability, and that is only 7.5% of the total population. Likewise, in 2021, approximately 2.64 million people in South Korea were registered as disabled, which is about 5% of the total population in South Korea. In terms of the current state of accessibility, the situation varies significantly among Asian countries. For example, according to ESCAP, the Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, the proportion of accessible public websites in South Korea is 97%, and in Hong Kong it is 99%. On the other hand, the proportion of accessible public website is only 5% in Thailand and 3.4% in mainland China. And regarding the building environment, in terms of the proportion of accessible government buildings, Singapore and Hong Kong achieved 100%. On the other hand, Thailand is 86%, Indonesia is 77%, South Korea and India are both 73%. So as the data shows, there are significant gaps in the current state of accessibility among these Asian countries.
When I talk about Oceania, I'm talking predominantly about New Zealand and Australia. And while there's more and more awareness and buy-in for implementing accessibility, and also earlier in the design process, I think it's probably pretty reflective of the global state of accessibility in that there's still a long, long way to go. I think the COVID situation did shine a light and highlight a lot of gaps and significant barriers for people with disabilities in being able to access critical public information. So there is an increasing awareness, but I think there is still a long way to go.
Thank you, Zoe. Susanna?
Yes, I can echo that from the European perspective as well. But I think also I've been in this for so long. I'm like a dinosaur in accessibility. So I really see a big difference. So things are happening. It's moving on. It's getting better. But then, of course, we keep wondering, why are we still doing introduction training in accessibility? How can that be the case in 2022? But I think so. It's kind of important to remember that things are changing and it's really moving forward. And we will talk about legislation later on, but we have been during a long period of time moving without legislation and trying to make sure that people do accessibility kind of for the right reasons. And I do believe that has moved Europe quite into a quite good position anyway, even if there's still much to be done. Of course, we can't retire yet.
Okay, thank you, Susanna. Judy?
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's the same across the continent, but more especially when we look at Africa. The persons with disability were looked at as kind of the lower kind of grade when it comes to being integrated into the society. So the issues of accessibility, well, they are beginning to pick up. Discussions have begun. We can see, I know we will talk about whether government is part of it. We can see slowly by slowly being taken up, but we're still a long way. We're still a long way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Judy. And well, yeah, definitely it is the same in Latin America. I think it is a little bit more synced with Africa, probably. In here, we still have a long way to go on the visibilization of people with disabilities and their needs, not only in the digital world. So maybe we have a little bit more of a longer way to go yet. But as Susanna said, we are getting there. You can actually perceive that things are happening. You know, my question is it enough? You know, at the speed that the digital world grows, is it enough? The efforts being made so far about digital accessibility, I think we're still falling short. But I think that the work that all the accessibility professionals are doing regarding activism about the topic is really important in order to make it.
The United States legal system is riddled with problems, and sometimes these problems result organically just from the complexities and the difficulties of creating laws that apply to so many different dynamics and circumstances that's impossible to do. And so sometimes the problems arise from there, but other times the problems are simply a result of the system. And with digital accessibility, that's the case. And when it comes to abusive litigation, what I'm referring to generally is sending demand letters or filing complaints en masse without there actually being a harm or detriment served by the named plaintiff. Rather, this is systematic litigation. And this is the wrong way to set precedent. Precedent is set clearly through establishing rules and providing guidelines for compliance. And currently, there's an asymmetric cost-reward ratio for plaintiffs' law firms. If they send out a demand letter or if they file a complaint, their cost right now, because they have created an infrastructure for this, is really just the filing fee and the wages necessary to create the paperwork. Really, that's all it comes down to. But on the other end, if you're the recipient of litigation, there are significant costs that far exceed those that the plaintiff's law firms incur. So this incentivizes plaintiffs to initiate litigation, and litigation is like pharmaceutical drugs. You want to avoid it at all costs. Sometimes it is necessary, sometimes it is helpful, but it is not a first resort. It is a last resort, and it should be avoided at all costs. And I think one answer to this, and this is plaintiffs' law firms, they need to face proportionate penalties for filing complaints without merit. Now, that's not to say that there hasn't been a lot of positive change that has come about in terms of accessibility from abusive litigation. The reality is, abusive litigation has advanced accessibility. But there's also been significant downside, and including many smaller businesses and entrepreneurs have been harmed down or shut down. Also, larger entities are now developing a negative association with accessibility, and they're getting the impression that digital accessibility is not really about providing access, but it's about not getting sued and mere compliance. And that's really when we want to reach this peak accessibility, this ideal utopia of accessibility where all digital assets are made fully accessible and an accessible experience is seamless with the experience itself. That's getting away from that. And so it's actually a detractor. So on one hand, yes, positive change has been affected, but on the other hand, there are also negative associations with it and costs that come with abusive litigation. And as a side note, many plaintiffs' law firms have proven that they have no real interest in accessibility. So we could make another point if we could say, well, these are genuine advocates and they are really doing good work, and it's not, this is not about simply being enriched from this. This is about a true cause. Well, having looked at the plaintiffs' law firms' own websites, many of them are inaccessible. And then many of them will also have overlays installed. At least that was the case when I last looked. And that tells you all you need to know, right before even looking at the complaint. And then having looked at the complaint, some of them are boilerplate. It's obvious that many of them are templated. And so really this is the wrong way to go about it. And it also shows that any advocacy is absent here. This is more of this is a financial gain rather than a true mission on behalf of people with disabilities. So it's important to look at it both ways and understand that, yes, acknowledging that there has been a good result of bad actions, but we can get a good result from good actions. So with the reality is, again, that these letters are being sent en masse, that litigation is being filed en masse, and there's been a windfall for plaintiffs' law firms from the resulting settlements. And this is grossly misaligned with the purpose of the ADA and the legal system. And this is why I call it abusive litigation. So again, it's helpful in bringing the inaccessibility of websites into the forefront, but we've also got to realize and acknowledge that there are negative consequences to doing so in this manner. So to be clear, I want to make clear that I am a proponent of litigation when warranted. Yes, litigation is it can be harmful. It can certainly be a negative, but sometimes it is necessary. And there are numerous instances of organizations ignoring glaring accessibility problems with real harm suffered by the plaintiffs. And so in those cases where there are authentic and genuine claims, I see these as distinct from the litigation that I am pointing out, from the abusive litigation that I'm pointing out. So this is not to say that all litigation is bad, but this is just to say that there is definitely a large portion of accessibility litigation that has been being driven not by accessibility, but by money. And because it is misaligned with its purpose, there will be negative that comes out of that, where there doesn't have to be. There doesn't have to be. We can achieve the result we want, and we can do it in the right way. And so the right way is that the Department of Justice issues regulations. And I say the Department of Justice specifically because Congress has put forth a bill, the Online Accessibility Act, and this has been this failed to pass initially and has been introduced again. And in this bill, it discusses website and mobile app accessibility, but there are many, many flaws in this bill. So I don't see this as the answer. The DOJ is very knowledgeable on digital accessibility, so I think they need to be the ones that follow through on their initial on the initial regulations that was in the works in 2010 and that ultimately was withdrawn in 2017. The great news is that as I do think regulation is coming. I do think the DOJ has this as one of their objectives. And I think now when this new regulation comes out, it's going to be able to encompass so many more things. It's going to be able to include more technologies. It's going to have a better working knowledge of accessibility. They might be nuanced in how they approach and adopt the web content accessibility guidelines. If they do, they may even just adopt parts of it, and then for other parts, being aware of the fact that violating a specific success criterion technically does not make someone in violation of the ADA. And so working through that, it's a very, very difficult endeavor, but it's one that the DOJ can do. And then they can also write in the updated version of WCAG 2.2, when it becomes available, which it will be by the time they issue regulations. So there is a lot of good that will come, even though it would have been ideal for there to be a precedent set forth, because when there's a precedent set forth, it makes everything that much easier to follow, and we have clear guidelines, and then we can implement them. What I've seen over and over again is that people want to be compliant with the law. It's not that people want to run away from the law. It's that they're unsure of how to be compliant with the law. Obviously, now it's clear that best practice is full conformance with WCAG 2.1 AA. But people need to have that precedent set, and they need to be made aware of that. And that's not what's happened. Despite the DOJ's recent guidance where they did reference 2.1 AA, that is not enough. There needs to be clear and established precedent and guidelines.
Are there laws? Are there litigations? How is the government approaching the topic? How is the private sector approaching accessibility?
In Asia and the Pacific, so far it is 42 out of 50, which is 84% of governments that have ratified the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. Even though ratification is a major step towards the realization of the rights of persons with disabilities, ratification must harmonize with domestic legislation and the policies in line with the Convention, and that is actually more complicated for each region. For example, even after the Japanese government ratified the CRPD, discrimination against persons with disabilities has remained for a long time. The biggest reason was that the Domestic Act for eliminating discrimination against persons with disabilities was not mandatory for private businesses, but it was only requested of them to put in their best effort. Because of many complaints from communities with persons with disabilities, finally the government revised the Act for eliminating discrimination against persons with disabilities last year, and they made it mandatory for private businesses. However, no clear penalty is stipulated in the revised Act. Also, reasonable accommodations are provided only when persons with disabilities requested it from a private business. So, without a claim or request by persons with disabilities, a private business does not have to take initiative and provide appropriate support. Accordingly, that was one of the reasons why there was no accessibility-related litigation in Japan in the past. As a result, private businesses have not been serious about implementing accessibility in their workplace, products, and services. Regarding the web accessibility, South Korea, Japan, China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and India have web accessibility laws and policies based on WCAG. All of them use the WCAG 2.0 version, but their scope varies. Some are limited to the government, and some covers both public and private sectors. For example, in Japan, some research shows that only 65% of local governments fully meet the web accessibility standard. And speaking of private businesses, they are even more behind. Only a limited number of big global corporations in each Asian country meet the accessibility standard. Unfortunately, that is the current state of accessibility in the Asian region.
So in both Australia and New Zealand, government agencies and organisations that are public-facing are mandated to meet WCAG. So in Australia, the Australian government requirement is WCAG 2 level AA, but with a strong encouragement to comply with 2.1 AA for a better usable experience. The New Zealand government, they were quite an early adopter of WCAG 2.1 AA, so they adopted this standard since July 2019, which was quite early. And so, yeah, their organizations are mandated to meet WCAG 2.1 AA. For private sector, we have the UN Convention Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the Disability Discrimination Act 1992. So both of these were ratified by Australia and New Zealand governments. I'd say that neither Australia and New Zealand are very litigious nations, saying that there have been a couple of notable lawsuits in Australia, one involving the Sydney Olympic Games back in 2000, and the other against Coles Supermarket in 2014. But generally, and especially in New Zealand, most accessibility complaints are handled and settled outside of court and in a rather informal way. And that can be seen as a good thing, but also it doesn't kind of enforce accessibility with a hard stick, I suppose, but to address that lack of robust legislation in New Zealand, there's been some great progress, recent initiatives by an alliance of disability groups called the Access Alliance here in New Zealand. And they've been instrumental in introducing a new bill, so an Accessibility for New Zealanders bill, which is specifically designed to address accessibility complaints and monitor progress. And alongside that bill, they've also established an independent accessibility governance board, which is there to ensure that disabled people are fully involved in any of the decision making at the highest level possible. So there's definite efforts from government level in addressing accessibility, and some exciting changes as well.
And do you think that there's a high compliance of these laws in the region?
I think it's getting better. I think there's still a lot of confusion and misunderstanding with WCAG, understanding the documentation, and the government has done a lot in trying to explain and make WCAG more digestible to practitioners and government agencies. A lot of work has been done in that area. So Australian government have produced a style guide, an accessibility style guide, and New Zealand have a design system. It's in alpha phase, but it's there to help practitioners and agencies use like reusable pattern libraries which are accessible. And I know that the Australian government also has published a Go design system, which is kind of for the same effect. So there are resources being provided to help explain WCAG for practitioners to implement more readily and effectively. Lots of clinics are held as well, like web standard clinics where people can drop in and speak with accessibility experts. These are run fortnightly, and just for practitioners and agencies to receive guidance on how to implement accessibility in a kind of informal setting.
Thank you, Zoe. Susanna?
So the EU consists of many countries, and we have had a quite fragmented market until recently. So a handful of member states did have accessibility legislation on the, I'm talking about web accessibility now, also previously to this, but since 2018, we have a common directive, as it's called, which is a law that covers all EU member states. And we also have for public sector, and we also have a decision about a next level kind of directive that covers also part of the private sector, so specific products and services, which will be applicable from 2025. This means that we all use the same standards and technical requirements. So for European legislation, we do use European norms. So what is called EN. So it's the EN 301549 that works as the presumed conformance or minimum requirements for the current legislation, and will be a big part of the upcoming legislation as well. But as that new legislation also covers some self-service terminals and things like that, it needs to be kind of broadened a little bit. So that's based on WCAG 2.1, but we also have several other requirements in this standard. And it's actually a standard that is now adopted in Kenya and also by Australia and Canada and so on. So it's kind of spreading throughout the world, which is nice. Europe is not a litigation. What did you say? Litigation? I can't say that. We don't do litigation. And it's not how the laws are intended to be used. So the enforcement is based on three things. It's monitoring. Each of the member states monitor the actual enforcement and implications of the websites. And then the website owners need to publish an accessibility statement. So it's like a self-declaration of accessibility. And then we have the third pillar, which is, to me, the most important one. It is that the end users have the right to provide feedback. And if that feedback is not taken into account and you don't get an alternative format, or the accessibility issues is not fixed, then you can escalate, and then it becomes a complaints system where you then can move to court if you have to. But I think that the kind of the way to solve the accessibility issues is really by feedback and having the communication between the end user and the actual public sector body. That is where these problems can be fixed. We just did a review of the directive for the first time, which is also a part of how European legislation works. We haven't published that study yet, but it will be soon on behalf of the Commission. And we do not see a lot of websites that are fully compliant yet. It's a new law, but we do see that the monitoring as such is really helpful. So monitoring and training and supporting is really how we try to do this in Europe. And I see loads of good examples on how this can potentially work. When it comes to penalties, that's up to each member state. So some member states work with penalties and some do not. And the harmonization is not perfect, but I think the whole idea of these directives is not to aim for litigation, but rather to fix the problems before they end up in court.
Good. Thank you, Susanna. Judy?
Yes, there are policies, I would say, within the national constitution in Kenya. So now I'm talking about Kenya. We have a clause that talks about the persons with disability and their entitlements. And it specifically talks about to be able to use sign language and braille or other appropriate means of communication, and to access materials and devices to overcome constraints from one's disability. So that is what the national constitution talks about. When we look at the national ICT policy, it also talks about accessibility and the requirement of having every information that is relayed to the public to be accessible. It talks about website accessibility, services and products. But we are yet to come to the place of implementation. So it is really perfect. It's good on paper, but we are yet to come to that place of being able to narrow down and know which government services or websites are actually accessible, so that we can move to the next phase of knowing if it is not, then what are the next steps that need to be taken. And probably the other thing could be the accessibility is, as I said earlier, it's in discussion, but it's not yet at the implementation stage. the industry, whether it comes to government or the private sector, there's still a lot of reluctance when it comes to accessibility of what is it that you're talking about, what is expected, what is required. As much as it's there in paper, it's not yet being implemented. I mean, in short, that's what I'm saying. It's not yet being implemented.
You're muted.
Thank you so much. Well, in Latin America, again, we're pretty close to Africa in that. There's not a lot of laws, not in all the countries in the region. Some of them have an accessibility law, but something that is not really known between the citizens of the region is that even though they don't have laws, specific laws in their countries, they can use other tools, to try to make their rights being complied, being respected, because all of the countries are countries that they have signed for the convention, the International Convention of Human Rights, and of course that accessibility is part of it. I know it is related to the right to access the information, but even though we've realized after the pandemic too that there's several other human rights being, complied through the internet and the digital world, such as access to education, work, health. So I think we need to open up a little bit more the discussion in our region. And definitely right now, we don't have a lot of not either litigations or people complying with the laws. Not even this government is complying with the laws right now. As a foundation from Dalat, we have several times presented some discussions about that to the different governments, and yet it's not a topic that is going in their agendas, right? But from a litigation perspective, something really interesting happened in Argentina last year. A blind lawyer presented a demand to actually against the very same website of the judiciary. And because it wasn't accessible, so he wasn't able to perform their duties as lawyer while the pandemic. And this person won. Actually, there were an appeal, and then he won in the second instance too. So I think that is going to be something that will help, enforce accessibility, especially in the government.
When it comes to accessibility, everybody looks at the Americans with Disabilities Act in the US, and it is important, but there are no explicit requirements for digital accessibility when it comes to websites, mobile apps, and other like digital assets. So there's the Americans with Disabilities Act, there's Section 508, there's Section 504, and there are also some state laws and some local laws. So there are many different types of laws in the US, but not many are incorporating digital accessibility. The best example is Section 508, which in their 2017 refresh, they incorporated WCAG 2.0 AA. Now, one of the difficulties with outright incorporating these technical standards is they're not always certain. There's a level of subjectiveness that goes into it because different people can have different interpretations on what would be correct. And then there are also just slight nuances, like, if you miss a minor, if you are not complete, if you do not completely pass on a given success criterion, does that automatically mean that you are out of compliance with the law? And I think that's the difficulty with incorporating wholesale the web content accessibility guidelines, because there will be entities that do make good faith efforts, and for whatever reason, it could just be an oversight from a content editor. One piece of content is out of conformance with the web content accessibility guidelines, and that should not give rise to liability. That should, this is part of a holistic approach where you have to embrace accessibility, you have to make sure that there's effective communication, because that is the standard under the ADA. You have to make sure that people are able to access content, that they are able to engage with functionality, but simply failing to meet one success criterion or a multiple of success criterion, that should not mean you are out of compliance with the law. And I think that is part of the difficulty that the US has had in creating regulations. So the DOJ was really, really close to creating regulations, and they stopped short of it. So I do think that will come. Recently, the DOJ released, and by the way, the DOJ is the regulatory and enforcement agency behind the Title II and Title III of the ADA. So everybody's really looking at them for guidance, and they did release guidance in March. But that guidance really the only thing that really changed was that they, one, reiterated their position. So they made very, very clear that that's their position, that that effective communication is necessary, and that websites are considered to be under Title III of the ADA. But also what the DOJ did was they provided 6 examples. And I think those 6 examples were really important, because those set out things that the DOJ, in terms of the law, considers to be necessary to be compliant with the ADA. Now, I would have added more bullet points there. I would have provided different examples. but what they've done is they've provided these things are what we think are necessary at a bare minimum. And it's not to say that was exhaustive, but it was good to see them finally come out. That was the first sign of explicit accessibility considerations that I've seen for Title III. I have seen other considerations for Title II and some really old guidance that was posted on the web for Title II, which applies to state and local governments, but this was the first I've seen from Title III. So that, to me, of the recent DOJ guidance, was the most important. The private sector is approaching this in the way of litigation. That's how this is going. There are about 15 plaintiffs' law firms that are continually filing lawsuits, and the private sector is working to catch up as fast as they can to make sure that they can lower their risk.
How do you think the future of accessibility in your region will be if everything continues as it is going?
As the accessibility laws and policies become mandatory in many Asian countries, it is expected to see more accessibility litigation in the near future. For example, in the case of Japan, the revised act will be enforced in 2024. So we expect to start seeing accessibility-related litigations then. We are very hopeful that private businesses take initiative and improve their accessibility before the act will be enforced. Another concern is the aging population. Even though the current total population of people with disability is relatively small, actually the number is rapidly increasing in Asian countries in recent years. And part of the reason is the aging population. In 2021, about 29% of the total population in Japan is over 65 years old. So around 1/3 of people are over 65 years old. China is facing the same issue for a different reason. Due to the one-child policy, the balance between the young and older generations is changing. As of 2021, people aged 60 and over made up nearly 1/5 of the Chinese population. By 2040, the population of people over 60 years old in China is projected to reach 28% of the total population. So it is expected that the aging population will increase the number of people with disability in the future across the Asian region.
Zoe?
So I am confident, and I do believe that it can improve. I think the speed at which it improves will depend a lot on more kind of push from government, from a top down, and a grassroots community driven approach as well. So having the two, I think, could speed up the increase and uptake of accessibility. It's already being done within Oceania, but I think it could actually, you know, increase and improve a lot. If it stayed at the same level as what it is now, then there would still be progress, but it would be a lot slower.
Thank you, Zoe. Susanna? So
I don't think that everything continues as now is ever happening, ever. So I think that kind of the question is it doesn't fit with how I see the world. So things are evolving all the time, and things are changing for the good or for the bad, but things are really moving on. And one thing that I see as the most important key here is not policy and not legislation, but technology. I see fantastic improvement in what technology can do for users, and all the fancy abbreviations of XR, VR, AI, tell me a couple of other ones. But really, we do see fantastic improvement on new solutions that will support accessibility experts and also the users and also the procurers, people who buy systems and technology, because really we shouldn't be doing what we're doing because when we are needed, something has already gone wrong. So we need to try to fix the accessibility problems at the core, you know, by default, so that everything that gets out in the market is accessible from the beginning, and then we could all go on holiday or something. But I think technology is really what I see is really going to happen in the next couple of years. I think it's amazing what is happening now, just so fast with all the new technologies. And I think I really see that is going to, no matter what the politicians do, that will really change accessibility as we know it, and also the whole digital environment, of course. But I also think that IAAP has a very important position here and a role in making sure that anyone who calls themselves an accessibility expert actually know what they're talking about. So to me, I see the certification of accessibility experts and the networking and the sharing of best practices that we are all trying to do in different parts of the globe from IAAP's side. I think that is also a very, very important piece of this, so that we kind of keep pushing for improvement of accessibility for end users with disabilities.
Thank you, Susanna. Judy? Judy?
Oh, sorry.
No, it's okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I think just as Zoe said, I mean, I wouldn't recommend things to stay the way they are. Definitely, I would want to see a difference. I would like to see more people jumping into the conversation. I would like to see more and more engagement from the sector, from the industry. Everybody who must be part of this to just jump in on board. And so it's good where we are at, that already people are talking about it, but I would like to see more, not just we get out of the just talking about it and we begin implementing, getting to know who is expected to do this and what is it that they are doing. That is where I would like to see us heading.
Thank you, Judy. Well, regarding LATAM, I think we're moving too slow, and it is critical for the region, because accessibility is not only about user capabilities, but about other intersectionalities that are affecting my region too. For example, the majority of the information about accessibility is in English, and the majority of people in my region don't speak English. It is about the access to devices. It is about the access to the infrastructure to have internet. So I think that all of those things that, of course, we can make better when we create accessible products are things that should be taken seriously before it becomes a social gap. technology is more and more important every time, and I'm genuinely worried about what's going on in our regions. I think we need, urgent actions in order to start working seriously on these topics. So I think that if things keep going on as they are going right now, we will fall short in our efforts. We definitely need more. Of course, I do appreciate everything that has been done until now, all the efforts of all the accessibility professionals and organizations. But I think that there's other parts of the society that needs to be involved. For example, universities should add accessibility in their own, programs of the careers in such a way that we have professionals that, as Susana said, we have to shift it to the left. We have to have professionals that are creating accessible products from the start. That is the only way that we can revert this situation where we have several digital products being published every day, and the majority of them are not accessible. Okay, so let's move to the next question. The next question is about how would you like it to be, but not only from a magical thought, let's say, as Garcia Marquez said, but from a perspective of an advice. Okay, I would love to hear all of you that are super important professionals in this area to let people know what can we do to make this future better. Some action items about making it better.
Asian countries need to make their society more diverse and inclusive. I assume that the small population rate of persons with disabilities could be one of the reasons why the Asian region is behind in accessibility compared with the European and North American regions. For example, the charity model is still dominant in many Asian countries. Let's say in the work environment, the average wage of the persons with disabilities is less than half of people without disabilities in many Asian countries. Even though some Asian countries, like Japan, have a law for employment promotion of persons with disabilities, and private businesses are required to hire a certain number of persons with disabilities, the required rate in Japan is actually only 2.2%, which is less than half compared to Germany's 5% and France 6%. And only half of the private businesses in Japan actually achieve that minimum employment rate. Some Asian countries like South Korea also require 5%. So again, the progress varies among Asian countries, but we should provide equal opportunities across the Asian region for persons with disabilities anyways.
Zoe?
Okay, so similar to what Susanna said before, I dream of a world where accessibility isn't even an issue, where we'll be out of a job, well, in the accessibility space anyway. I hope that we're all still going to be employed in something. But yeah, and the other thing is, I'd love to see a world where accessibility is not considered only out of a fear of litigation or punishment or bad reputation, where it's not contested or fought against. And it's not considered as just an optional extra or a bonus if the budget permits. It would be great to see, it being considered right from the start as a business as usual approach, and to be part of the acceptance criteria of every product, that would be kind of the ideal situation. And I think taking a compliance first, experience second approach is kind of just, it perpetuates the problem. I think accessibility isn't a compliance issue. Compliance with WCAG is a good start, but I think there's too much reliance on that as a checklist. And then you can still have accessible, compliant products that are absolute terrible experiences for people with disabilities. So what I'd love to see more of is including people with disabilities within the design, development and testing of products, more usability testing, including people with disabilities, because that approach, I think, has the best long-term success. In our company, we facilitate a lot of usability testing sessions, and it's only when the clients actually see firsthand the real life impact that inaccessible products have on a user that it clicks, they get it, and they are so motivated and inspired to either remediate an issue or just to start creating products from scratch in an accessible way. So I think that, for me, is the answer and the advice that I would give on trying to improve the state of accessibility.
Thank you so much, Zoe. Susanna?
So I think, first of all, accessibility can seem a little bit overwhelming, but everyone can do something. I think that's my advice. Start somewhere and do something. Just take one step. That's good enough for today, and then we can keep on going. And I think really we need to look at the young people and the elderly, because I think we really need to start educating young people so that whenever you get a higher education, or even earlier, that accessibility becomes part of the curriculum, because otherwise we will keep having too few experts and people who don't know what they're talking about in all. Designers, UXers, developers, content managers, all of them will not know what they do, and we keep doing remediation instead of fixing it. So I think for any country, anywhere, I think training and early training and making sure accessibility is part of the curriculum, that I think is the kind of a key, one of the keys, at least, for making sure that we don't end up having the same discussion in 10 years. So that's one thing. And the other, I think, at least in Europe and many other parts of the world, we have a demographic change, so that we do have quite a few older adults that are still kind of working or active, and nowadays they're also online. So and I think that can potentially help a little bit what Zoe is talking about, kind of mainstream accessibility, because when that group cannot be, I mean, it's already a mistake to think it's a small group, but still that is a mistake that many people have, that disabled people are kind of them and they are out there, and that's a little group. But when you consider everyone that is over 35 or something, because that is kind of when you become elderly in the internet world, then there's a huge potential client group out there. And as we grow older and we keep, I mean, if we are lucky enough to become old, we will probably keep being a little bit digital, at least for a while, and then all of us will encounter some kind of accessibility issue. And I think that is a way to kind of make accessibility a little bit more sexy, because it's not specific things for specific needs for specific groups, but really making sure that it's kind of a we thing. And when, at least I think that has been quite successful for us, trying to kind of broaden the perspective, getting the perspective of kind of the silver economy into the mix, then that makes it easier for even very commercial actors to think that this is something we should look into. It's not only a kind of nice to have, but it's also, it makes sense from return on investment perspective.
Great. Thank you, Susanna. Judy?
Thank you. Just to add on to what my colleagues have said, the importance, the need to be able to understand accessibility. And in this case, I mean, you see, like when you come to Africa and you're talking about accessibility, people will talk about what you were talking about, Susanna. People will talk about access to internet. People will say, yes, you know, the rural areas, they are getting internet access. And it kind of waters down what it is that you're talking about. So I think there needs to be that very clear understanding that there is access to internet for all, and there is also accessibility to the internet, to devices for all, so that it is clear that there is no watering down of what one could be saying. Secondly, I would like to see a monitoring and evaluation for whatever has been put in place. Is it being monitored? Is it being evaluated? What is happening? What are the challenges? What is, you can be able to check from other regions, what have they done? If this is not working for you, then how do we move forward from that? And I think the third one that I would like to see, just what Susanna said about certification. And I think that's what I've been trying to say here in Kenya. If we can have accessibility part of our curriculum, part of our course, for everyone who's going to do web development, developers, whatever it is that you're going to do, that you can be able to understand what accessibility actually is, then looking at the next generation, we could be moving to a better place. And I think, like Zoe said, maybe the rest of us will be looking for another job when all this is done. Or maybe we'll just be making better what is already done. But I think those are the things that I would say right now we need to see a difference.
Thank you very much, Judy. Well, I definitely concur with everything you've said. Especially, I really liked this comment about gathering and talking, creating this kind of spaces where we can discuss about accessibility and put the discussion out there. It is very important, and to inspire new generations to start doing something about it. It is today, it is now. It doesn't matter what you're doing right now. There's a new perspective you can have regarding this. Question your bias, question the way you perceive the world. It is super interesting. It might be frightening sometimes, but it is the only way to create and innovate and create a digital world that is better than the real world. Let's not, repeat the mistakes we've done so far in the digital world, and get involved. That is the most important thing. And take into account, it is about all of us, right? We are missing a lot of people's perspective and diversities by having an inaccessible world. And on the other hand, I really liked what Susanna said about we are going to need it. We're going to need accessibility. As we grow old, we will have disabilities, acquired disabilities too. And sometimes as a person that, works creating the digital world, I wonder if we are not building this beautiful castle from the outside with no doors, and we will be left out, when we realize that we haven't built these bridges, we haven't built these doors, in order to be part of the digital world. So let's question ourselves in our daily practice, and let's do it better.
One mindset that needs to change is that full conformance is impossible or impractical. And thinking in terms of websites, people think, well, I have so many pages on my website, there's so many screens, it's impossible for full conformance. No, it is not. It is very, very possible. What you have to do is you have to take a regimented approach. You take one digital asset, you focus on that digital asset, you focus on one page or one screen at a time, and you work through all of the success criteria until you are fully conformant. Granted, it might make time, but you take that approach and eventually your entire website will be conformant. Now you might think, well, I have, what is commonly replied is that, well, we have thousands of pages. Like, how are we going to do this? Well, your pages are templatized, and the content is basically templatized too. It's uploaded the same. So you just have to take an approach. You have to approach it one at a time and make it happen. But relying upon this idea that full conformance is impossible is a bad mindset. It gives way to laziness, and it gives way to having outs. Oh, well, there's going to be a few accessibility issues because they're just there. Well, why are they there? If you know they're there, then go ahead and address them. So that's one thing I would like to see changed. And I think when it does, when people stop looking for the out of, oh, this is more complex than I anticipated, or this is more difficult than I thought it would be, then that really dispels that. It's like, no, it is difficult. There are resources that are involved, but you need to make it happen. Now, when you're for smaller businesses, for smaller websites, for owner, operator, controllers of smaller operations, this is where the platforms need to dramatically improve. And when I'm talking about platforms, I'm talking about GoDaddy Website Builder, Wix, Squarespace, Vimeo, these type of platforms that offer websites, media out of the box, something, podcast providers. They need to make sure that users have everything they need to provide an accessible experience. And from there, they can provide guidance on what the users need to do as far as their content creation, as far as their editing, as far as any code editing is done. Then the users can take over, and at that point, it will be their responsibility. But it all comes down to looking at things and siloing them on what needs to happen and taking it one step at a time, but taking it with a serious approach, a regimented approach, where there are no excuses, where you are doing everything you can to become fully conformant. When you take that approach, your website is much, much more likely to be fully accessible than when you provide yourself that mental out of, well, full conformance is impossible. No, it is not.
Okay, so thank you very much to all the panelists, to all these great professionals that have given a valuable feedback about what is going on each one of the regions. And I think that one of the main things that we have to take care of is addressing what is going on and doing something about it. That is something that all of the accessibility professionals, which happen to be activists too, are asking and are talking about. Please get involved. That is what is going to actually change the world. We have to start talking about it. We have to start questioning ourselves and the way we create the digital world. And finally, let's do something about it. So thanks so much to FITS. Thanks so much for inviting us. And please be the spread word that we need. Thanks so much for creating these kind of spaces that are the ones that actually help improve people's lives.
See everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.